Russia's invasion of Ukraine is into its 16th month. Moscow's occupied about 18% of its neighbour and has done so by smashing towns and cities using rockets, missiles and artillery shells. At times, its military has fired as many as 20,000 shells in a single day. Little wonder then that they're running short. So, what to do? Well, they've ramped up their domestic weapons production and they've been helped by their few allies. Iran's already supplied drones to Russia. Now, Sky News can reveal Tehran may be supplying far more besides. I'm Kamali Melbourne, and this is the Sky News Daily. Hi Debs, can you hear me okay?
Hi, yes, I can. Hello, how are you?
I hear you're in an airport departure lounge.
Well, I'm not even a departure lounge. I'm on a seat in a hall in the airport in Helsinki, and I'm transiting from Estonia back to London. I've just been on a trip with our Foreign Secretary to Estonia.
Fantastic stuff. In today's episode, we speak to our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who has seen a contract purportedly drawn up between the Iranian Defence Ministry and a Russian arms firm.
It's about the sale of Iranian ammunition and other military material to Russia. We haven't been able independently to verify the authenticity of the document, but I've shown it to the Ukrainians, I've given it to the British government, and I've spoken to the Foreign Secretary about it, and he wasn't able to comment specifically on the document, but he did relay the concern about how Iran has been assisting Russia during its war in Ukraine.
So what kind of details are in this contract that's been drawn up? Who's it between?
This contract is between the Ministry of Defence and Logistics of the Armed Forces of Iran and also a Russian entity called JSC Rosoboron Export, which is the Russian military export entity. And it is dated the 14th of September last year. I understand that that date does coincide with other reporting about the potential for this kind of activity in terms of ammunition sales to be taking place.
Take us through what kind of munitions are being supplied.
So the contracts for different types of ammunition for Russian weapons, different types of shells, different shell sizes for artillery pieces and for tanks. So we're talking about large bullets, really, that could obviously cause really horrendous damage. And the contract is for it seems to be like sample quantities. So there's like a price list that sets out the different size of the round, how many pieces are included, and then the total price. So for this one contract that I've seen, it all comes in at just over $1 million. And then I've also seen the supplementary sort of section to a contract. And now the identifying number on the main contract is different by one digit to the identifying number on the supplementary part. So one ends in 60 and one ends in 59. Now, a source told me they believe it's because like around that same time, a number of contracts, similar contracts for different samples of ammunition were agreed. And so that kind of explains that discrepancy. Now, this supplement is interesting because it includes things like 2 barrels for a howitzer artillery piece and 2 barrels for a T-72 tank. So it's, when I've shown this to the Ukrainians, they've sort of said it's quite interesting because it gives an indication perhaps of the kind of military material that the Russians are in need of. My sources say that they believe that these were kind of sort of samples ahead of larger deals being struck.
Now, it's fascinating that it seems to be this is sort of like a sampler menu of what you can get if you fulfill the contract. And of course, at the time that this contract purports to have been drawn up, there were lots of reporting around that Russia was running short of ammunition, and those kind of large artillery shells are exactly the kind of things that the Russians were using to pound the Ukrainian cities as they basically put them under siege before sending in infantry.
Russia said itself they've been trying to galvanise their own industrial base to produce more weapons, but they've also been going to their limited number of allies to try to get more weapons. But it really does underline how Russia clearly given its war effort, is expending so much ammunition trying to fight in Ukraine that their stocks, like the Western stocks, are running low.
Deborah, what does the contract and your reporting tell us about the way that these weapons got to Russia from Iran?
So the contract's written in English, which might seem a bit strange given it's between Iran and Russia, purportedly. But I've been told that that's not unusual. It's actually quite customary when it comes to contracts being drawn up by Iran with another international partner. And obviously, English is an international language, so perhaps that shouldn't be a surprise. There are spelling mistakes in the contract too. But again, the source told me that that's also possible to have typos. It does seem a bit strange that you'd have typos in an official contract. But another person that I've shown this to also agreed with that assessment that it was possible to have spelling mistakes. And it has to be said, it really does read like a standard contract. So there are formal articles setting out who the parties are, what the subject of the contract is, what the prices are. So like I said, the first part of the contract is valued at just over $1 million. And then that supplementary section is valued at, it was just under sort of $750,000. And then it also talks about the terms and conditions, so the delivery, how it's going to be taken by plane, how it needs to be sure that all of the supplies have the right kind of customs checks and permissions. It seems that these first samples were to be flown from the airport in Tehran to Russia. It doesn't go into more details on that, but obviously in the contract there's provision for them to be shipped as well.
The items that were to be shipped, they'll be going across the Caspian Sea, right?
So we've reported earlier this year that Iran had provided large supplies of ammunition to Russia. These were in shipments that allegedly happened. Russian cargo ships took these, it was ammunition for small arms and also for artillery pieces. So regular bullets and then larger shells for artillery guns, mortars and sort of rocket launchers. And that they were shipped via the Caspian Sea. That's never been confirmed by Russia or Iran. But if it ever were to be confirmed, then it would really signal a deepening of the support from Iran to Russia for this war.
Just explain why moving arms across the Caspian Sea into Russia is a much easier way for them to move weapons than, of course, across the Black Sea, which borders NATO member states, Turkey.
The Black Sea itself, it's basically within the range of the war zone in Ukraine. So to try to ship any kind of cargo, we're seeing a lot about the shipping of grain through the Black Sea, requires a huge amount of negotiation to make that passage. While geographically, it's not the most direct route to get arms to Ukraine, if that's where this ammunition is ultimately destined for. Going across the Caspian Sea, it's a stretch of water that connects, directly from Iran to Russia, is a much easier route for them to take, and also much harder for Western allies to be able to track.
There has been reporting, and you've done some of it, about concerns that there are other countries that could also be supplying the Russians with weapons.
The US has said that they believe that China had been considering providing military support to Russia. China has denied that, but China has also not condemned Russia's actions in Ukraine and has also been supporting Russia through non-military aid. Were China to decide that it was going to start actually actively giving weapons to Russia, that would potentially be a game-changing moment in terms of ensuring that Russian stockpiles are replenished much more quickly.
I also wonder about those other non-aligned countries that might well be supplying weapons. I mean, countries like North Korea as well.
Again, another pariah state. There's been reporting that Russia's been looking at other sort of former Soviet states that it still has friendly relations with and which have the same kind of arsenal of weapons in their stockpiles to get weapons from them. Russia is under heavy sanctions from the West, and that does restrict its ability to manufacture new weapons. But Western officials believe the Russians have been using up stockpiles of weapons that NATO allies, for example, would have long discarded as being unsafe because they're so old. So again, it just shows you the level of risk that Russia seems to be willing to take with its own soldiers.
The Iranian military-industrial complex, they're under sanction. Do they have the capacity to be producing weaponry that they could then export?
They do absolutely have the capacity to export weapons. They've been doing it on an industrial scale in terms of supporting militias in Iraq, in Yemen and Lebanon. They're also highly sophisticated in terms of their technical expertise. They have large numbers of engineers with the ability to develop weapons.
So you've shown this contract to your sources. What have the Ukrainians said about it?
They said to me that they are working to find out if it's authentic, if it's credible, and if it is, then they'll be looking to take action. They said that they found the contract extremely interesting. I've also shown it to our Foreign Secretary. He said he couldn't comment on it immediately because obviously I'd just shown it to him. But he said that the UK would be looking too to see if they could confirm whether or not it was credible. Again, as well, saying that they would respond if it turns out that it is authentic. And he did also reiterate that the UK has already issued sanctions many times against Iran over its activities, including in terms of supporting Russia when it comes to drones, which is something that the international community has widely condemned Iran over.
And what about the Iranian and Russian side?
Well, I've gone to the Iranian embassy in London and to the Russian embassy in London to ask for a response about the allegations that this contract exists and the content of the contract. I haven't heard back from either of them, but if they do give a response, then of course we'll report that.
Russia has few allies in this war, but I guess one ally they can rely on is the Iranians for, as your reporting suggests, material support, but also in not condemning the action that they're carrying out in Ukraine.
That relationship has only strengthened following Russia's war in Ukraine, with Russia really needing Iran's support. That relationship is complicated because Russia, of course, is on the side with China, the US, the UK and other European allies when it comes to trying to contain Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions, but at the same time seems happy to have this relationship of convenience when it comes to getting help from Iran to support its war in Ukraine. And the worry is that as that relationship deepens, that perhaps Iran is going to be benefiting more from the fact that Russia is relying on it so much, perhaps. And then what does that mean in terms of what Iran can ask for in return?
It's kind of historically fascinating to think that, you know, it would have been the Soviets who provided Iranians with T-72 tanks back in the day. And now, after the Russians start running short of those, the Iranians perhaps are offering to return the favour in some way.
It really does show that this relationship between Russia and Iran is developing. For Russia, it's clearly seeking help from Iran. As we know, these devastating suicide exploding drones that Iran has provided have given Russia the ability to attack Ukraine's air defences. They've been using sort of a mixture of Iranian drones and then also their own long-range missiles to smash Ukrainian cities, especially Kyiv in the last few days. In return, we've previously reported how Iran has received cash from Russia for those drones, not surprising, but also allegedly received captured Western weapons captured on the battlefield in Ukraine, sent by Russia to Iran. And the fear is that Iran might be using these captured weapons, which include British anti-tank missiles, the NLAW, to reverse engineer them and then perhaps to advance their own weapons capabilities through that kind of exchange.
The sources that you've spoken to say that is a real concern, that the Iranians could be making Assad's NATO-style weapons for use on the battlefield against, of course, Western enemy.
There's also a concern about what kind of technology Russia is willing to share with Iran. So this all comes against the backdrop of Iran's nuclear capabilities, its desire, according to the West, to develop nuclear weapons. There had been this long-standing deal between Iran and a group of countries, including Russia. So Russia, China, the United States, the UK, France and Germany, all together trying to put pressure on Iran using sanctions and other efforts to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. And Iran has always insisted its nuclear technology is only for civilian purposes. But remember, that deal between those two sides collapsed when Donald Trump was president of the United States. And the concern, of course, underpinning all of this is, while nobody believes that Russia wants to see a nuclear-armed Iran, and there's no sense of that being part of this, whatever assistance Russia is giving to Iran when it comes to technology, that is a concern. There are sanctions against Iran, heavy sanctions from the allies that are deliberately designed to try to prevent Iran from developing its nuclear capabilities. And so as Iran is developing this relationship with Russia in terms of military exchanges, then that's going to be a concern not only for Western allies, but also in the region.
If Iran is providing material support for Russia in its war effort, what kind of effect could that have on other nations who have a difficult relationship with the West?
There's clearly sort of globally, isn't there? There's like a struggle going on over who is on whose side. The numbers that are openly and actively supporting Russia are small, and they are typically more the pariah states like Iran and North Korea. But yes, between those two spectrums, there is this pool of these non-aligned countries, many of whom do believe the false Russian narrative that's pumped out about the reasons behind the invasion of Ukraine, and look to the West with disdain, given wars of the past, like, for example, the US-led invasion of Iraq, and sort of think of hypocrisy when the US and the UK condemn what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So it is a difficult dilemma. Clearly, there's loads of work going on diplomatically to try to convince and influence these non-aligned countries, including huge influential countries like India, for example, that actually Ukraine is on the right side of history and countries should ally with Ukraine and absolutely condemn Russia.
And there is the effort, isn't there, on the part of the West, the G7 at least. I know that the Indians and the Brazilians were invited to the recent conference to try and bring them across from the sort of non-aligned column into the Ukrainian support column.
And especially for the UK, we've got such close ties with India. It's clearly a difficult issue to have to dance around, the fact that India is, also closely allied with Russia. Each individual country is going to be thinking of its own national interests and what benefits it the most when it looks not just to the world as it is right now, but the world as it will be going forwards. The balance of power globally is shifting. And that's why when you hear politicians like Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak talking about this fight for democracy, it really is alive. And the war in Ukraine is right at the heart of that. But it's not just about Ukraine when it comes to that struggle. It's a global struggle, and countries are all having to make up their own minds.
My thanks, of course, to Deborah Haynes and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Kamali Melbourne. This episode was produced by Annie Joyce. The editor is Philly Beaumont.